Good morning, everyone. Here's your Mormon news update for October 29th, 2025. Today we're going to start with this article that says, as pickleball continues to surge in popularity across the United States, a group of students in Utah hope to modify the format of collegiate competition. The current schedule excludes players who don't want to choose between religious values and playing for and/or supporting their team. They are asking for Sunday to be a day of rest. BYU is most prominently attached to this college pickleball scheduling conflict, but the problem extends far beyond the primary academic institution for members of the Mormon faith. A new petition calling for change has been signed by club athletes, coaches, and supporters all across the country. Because most students have classes on Fridays, tournaments currently take place on Saturdays and Sundays. Group play typically happens on Saturday, elimination brackets on Sunday. Approximately 60 to 70% of the total population in the state of Utah identifies as Mormon. There are more than 2 million members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in Utah. A large portion of the population attends local universities like BYU, Utah Valley, Utah State, and Utah. Sundays are sacred within the Mormon Church. It is a true day of rest dedicated to family and religion. Members are encouraged to spend time reading scriptures, praying, and engaging in spiritually uplifting activities such as service to others, family history work, or visiting those who are sick or lonely. They are counseled to avoid shopping, working, exercising, and other activities that are worldly in nature. As a result, Brigham Young University does not compete in athletics on Sunday, ever. Other schools like Utah State and Utah Valley try to avoid Sunday competition, but they are not directly aligned with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, so they have a little bit more leeway. The Cougars do not have any. If their basketball team makes March Madness, it is scheduled for Thursdays and Saturdays. They do not practice, play, or travel on Sundays, period. You get the idea. Sundays are sacred. And a new petition calls for change to pickleball schedules. This issue, though, extends beyond Sunday play to the cultural DNA of the LDS faith, which emphasizes total commitment and sacrifice. The following story, shared by President Russell M. Nelson, perfectly illustrates this high-demand culture. He said, "Recently I learned of a fearless young Laurel. She was invited to participate in a statewide competition for her high school on the same evening she had committed to participate in a Stake Relief Society meeting. When she realized the conflict and explained to competition officials that she would need to leave the competition early to attend an important meeting, she was told she would be disqualified if she did so. What did this Latter-day Laurel do? She kept her commitment to participate in the Relief Society meeting. As promised, she was disqualified from the statewide competition. When asked about her decision, she replied simply, 'Well, the church is more important, isn't it?' Back when I was a true believing member, I found out that my oldest sister did yoga on Sundays, and I was appalled." Now let's go to the Salt Lake Tribune, where it says, of the major Western religious traditions in the United States, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is the only one that continues a service until death policy for its top leader, which means having aging authorities is almost inescapable. Last week, Dallin H. Oaks, at age 93, became the 18th prophet president of the Utah-based faith, succeeding Russell M. Nelson, who died September 27th at 101. Oaks will be expected to serve until the end of his life, as Nelson and 16 others did before him. Oaks' first counselor in the governing first presidency, Henry B. Ailing, is 92. D. Todd Christofferson, his second counselor, is 80, one of 4 apostles in their 80s. Does this collective gerontocracy give rise to a stagnant, intractable, out-of-touch leadership? Would switching to a system that brings younger blood into the leadership invigorate the global faith of 17.5 million? Historian Gregory Prince, who has studied and written about these issues, discusses these, frankly, age-old questions, including how leadership succession has evolved throughout Latter-day Saint history, the advantages and disadvantages of having aging church leaders, and the prospect of apostles and first presidency members someday being granted emeritus status rather than serving until they die. If you want to listen to the entire episode of Mormon Land, the link will be in the show notes. I want to focus on just one very interesting section that says the following. What are the drawbacks of having these older leaders? If you take 4 Ailing presidents, McKay, Kimball, Benson, and Monson, in each case there was what I consider to have been a major crisis that arguably would not have occurred if you either had a fully competent president or the next in line in the first presidency, so there was not the possibility of a power vacuum. What were those crises? With President McKay, it was the priesthood temple ban on black members. Toward the end of 1969, Hugh Brown, his counselor, made the assumption that the policy banning ordination of black men could be changed administratively, and he tried to do it. That created a real clash of the titans. It didn't happen, and it was the reason that Brown was released from the first presidency when McKay died. When Spencer Kimball was ailing in the early 1980s, two senior apostles, Ezra Taft Benson and Mark Peterson, and one then junior apostle, Boyd Packer, set about to dismantle the church's history division, and they were successful in doing that. That had a really chilling effect on the writing of church history that lasted for years and years. Benson, when he was out of function, they had the unfortunate, catastrophic disciplining of intellectuals that became known as the September Six, which had even a greater and longer-lasting devastating effect on the writing of church history. And then finally, with President Monson, they had the infamous 2015 LGBTQ policy later dropped. All four of those, arguably, were catastrophic events that wouldn't have existed otherwise. Personally, I have a child who has, for over 2 years now, worked with people over the age of 90. The other day we were out walking and I asked them, in your experience when working with people over the age of 90, are most of them incontinent, meaning having no or insufficient voluntary control over urination or defecation? In response, they asked, are you thinking of someone who uses a wheelchair? And when I said yes, thinking of Dallin Oaks, my child affirmed that in their experience, every person they have worked with over the age of 90 who also uses a wheelchair suffered from some level of incontinence. I have absolutely no idea whether Dallas falls into this category or not, but personally, if I was in this position, I think I would want to be retired and spend my time doing anything besides running a corporation. Now let's go to the church news where it says President Holland spoke during a worldwide devotional for youth made available for wards and stakes to watch on Sunday, October 26th or afterward. Young Women General President Emily Bell Freeman and Young Men General President Timothy L. Farnes also spoke from the Kirtland Temple as the broadcast focused on the 2025 youth theme, Look Unto Christ. Youth were invited to gather in groups with their ward or stake, view the broadcast together, and reflect on all they have learned from the theme this year. Afterward, youth were given the opportunity to answer the questions, how has looking to Christ helped you in times of need? And what specific action will you take today to continue to look to Him and bear testimony? President Holland said he hoped to tell the youth some lessons he has learned in his years that they have not yet learned in their days. First, their time in the Young Women and Young Men program should be some of the happiest years of their lives, filled with fun, some freedom, and not too much responsibility. But already they are facing decisions that will shape their futures. In this decade of life, their friends are important, as are the people they will start to date. They will go to the temple to receive their endowment and serve a mission. All of this comes with increased responsibility. For example, how you live after you return from the temple and your mission will be one indication of how your sense of responsibility is developing and what the Lord can trust you to perform in the future, President Holland said. When I heard messages like this as a teen, I often experienced a rapid and painful shift. The initial gentle tug of the Lord loves me, a feeling of unconditional divine acceptance, was swiftly followed by the paralyzing dread of there is no way I will ever be good enough. I now understand this cycle as a classic psychological outcome of internalizing the perfectionist, high-demand culture of the LDS Church. This phenomenon is termed spiritual injury or religious trauma because the harm is generated by the systemic expectations, not by external sin. The initial positive feeling comes from the gospel's core message of divine love. President Holland taps into this with the assurance that youth years should be some of the happiest, filled with fun, some freedom, and not too much responsibility. This is the emotional hook of belonging. However, the shame immediately follows because Jeffrey's message instantly converts the unconditional promise into a contingent requirement. The subsequent warning that how you live after you return from the temple and your mission will be one indication of how your sense of responsibility is developing and what the Lord can trust you to perform in the future, functions as the psychological trigger for shame. This language links a person's eternal potential and divine trustworthiness directly to flawless compliance with institutional milestones. The teen is made to believe that the only path to God's continued trust is perfect performance. The resulting shame is the painful emotion that arises arises when the teen's imperfect, real-life self-inevitability collides with the unattainable, perfect self the system requires, confirming the internal verdict. I am failing the test of worthiness, and therefore I am failing God's trust. Back to the article. As he has said in the past, President Holland affirmed to the youth how much his full-time mission in Great Britain affected him for good. If I can talk to you about a veritable pot of gold at the end of your rainbow, it is that combined experience of receiving your temple endowment and going on a mission, he said. There are lots of reasons for this, but at the top of the list is that it is God's work. He already knows you, and perhaps for the first time in your life, you get to know him deeply and personally. Now, I don't know about you, but going to the temple did not make me feel closer to God. I found it exceptionally boring. And the temple is not a good place for everyone, as evidenced by this photo that has a graphic of a temple that has been scribbled out and written over the top. It says, "When you hold your pregnant belly and tell me you'll pray for me in the temple because I'm having fertility issues, it makes me want to," and then scream, cry, punch something are all crossed out, and die is underlined. Back to the article. Every single person has reason to feel fear sometimes, but remembering the invitation to look unto Christ, not doubting or fearing, is the answer, President Holland explained, adding that the saints in Kirtland who did this saved the church and their posterity in the process. He bore his testimony of the things he knows because he has tried to look unto God and Jesus Christ in every thought. My young friends, I am more certain than anything else I know in this world that the gospel of Jesus Christ is true and the way to peace and salvation, President Holland said. I know that Joseph Smith, exactly the age some of you are now, saw God the Eternal Father and his Son Jesus Christ. I know that the Book of Mormon is the most important book I have ever read in my life. He concluded, I am not fearful for the future of this church because of you. President Holland's statement is a rhetorical strategy that externalizes all internal conflict by framing fear and doubt as a failure to look unto Christ, thereby demanding their suppression rather than their psychological processing. He then employs his own absolute certainty to transfer his spiritual conviction to the youth, creating a framework where the youth are taught to trust the leader's knowledge over their own experience. This message acts as an inoculation against critical thought, ensuring that any personal struggles, anxiety, or intellectual doubt are immediately interpreted as a spiritual failure and are solved only by adopting the institutional narrative, culminating in placing the enormous burden of the church's future success entirely on the obedient performance of its youth. Now let's go to a Facebook group for LDS women where one person said, I live in North Carolina and have 2 children. One of them is 8 years old and has autism. He doesn't tolerate crowds or staying still and quiet for more than 15 minutes. Honestly, I can't pay attention to the talks during sacrament meeting because I'm always focused on him, worried that he might yell or run away. For that reason, we usually wait outside the whole time. In primary, he doesn't like when the children sing because the loud noise bothers him, especially when there are more than 10 people in the room. I once attended another Christian church that had a special program for children with autism or disabilities. They took care of him during the meeting, and for the first time, I was able to listen to the message. They had a program designed for children with disabilities, and the classes were adapted to their needs. I don't want to distance myself from the church, but I truly feel that we could benefit from having a similar program in primary for children with special needs. I agree. It is disheartening that an institution with billions in assets has not yet prioritized a ministry that tangibly supports special needs families, effectively turning away those who are trying their utmost to participate in discipleship. Next up is LDS Living with the title 5 Helpful Things to Say to Someone Before They Receive Their Endowment. Someone you love is preparing to receive their temple endowment, and you couldn't be happier for them to learn more about this sacred gift. At the same time, you may feel unsure about what to say to help them prepare. To help guide your talks about the temple, here are a few conversation suggestions based on teachings from author Melinda Brown. Melinda has years of experience teaching a stake temple prep class for students at Brigham Young University. She received a master's degree from Duke Divinity School and recently published the best-selling book An Endowment of Love. Let's see what 5 things to say. The first one, help your loved one understand why the endowment matters now. Immediate blessings of the endowment you could talk about include a stronger sense of unity, belonging, connection, identity, and purpose, increased feelings of love for others, especially ancestors, a renewed commitment to renewing and understanding covenants, a clearer mind and ability to focus, more hope, confidence, and perspective during trials, greater self-discipline and strength to resist temptation, dedicated time to unplug from technology, divine guidance in making decisions. The first counsel given for preparing for the temple endowment promises profound desirable outcomes, such as a clearer mind and greater self-discipline, but critically fails to provide any actionable behavioral mechanisms for achieving these subjective psychological states. This gap between the promise and the mechanism is a common trait of high-demand religious rhetoric. It spiritualizes complex psychological skills, treating them as automatic immediate blessings of the ritual itself rather than as the result of conscious effort like mindfulness or time management. Consequently, when the promised clarity or peace doesn't materialize, the member is not prompted to seek effective external strategies, but is instead led to conclude that they have a spiritual deficiency, thus chaining their continued effort and worthiness to perpetual ritualistic performance rather than actual self-improvement. Some call this the Mormon hamster wheel. The second topic it says to cover is the role of divine law in God's love. Recognizing that divine law is divine love is crucial because when we see them as opposites or in tension with each other, it can feel really complicated, Melinda says. She suggests this view makes things less complicated, but this simplicity is merely rhetorical. It is not emotionally accurate. She seems to be attempting to simplify the complex, messy reality of being human into a neat black and white equation: obedience equal love. And the human mind finds this more complicated, not less, because it creates an unsolvable internal conflict. If the law is perfection, and perfection is impossible for humans, then love is perpetually unattainable. The third suggestion is, like other ordinances, the endowment involves making sacred promises with God. To help your loved ones see covenants as blessings rather than obligations, Melinda suggests talking about what it truly means to keep our covenants. That reframing of covenants to guard, protect, treasure, or cherish instead of just obey is actually a great idea psychologically because it shifts motivation from extrinsic duty or doing things to avoid punishment to intrinsic love, protecting something of value. It gives a crucial emotional margin of error, making members feel less shame when they stumble since they can still see themselves as cherishing the commitment even if they're not perfect. However, the problem is that this healing interpretation clashes with the LDS Church's real-world laws and doctrine. While Melinda says to cherish the institutional policies that govern worth, access to the temple still require absolute black and white obedience, forcing members back into the very performance-based mindset that causes spiritual stress in the first place. The fourth thing to say to someone before they receive their endowment, Melinda says, is invite your loved one to approach their first endowment session with an open mind and to trust that their experience will be unique and evolve over time. Hearing others' perspectives on the temple can create expectations or biases that could impact their first impressions. Sounds exactly like what someone would say if they know the LDS temple endowment is historically derivative of Masonry, but they want to maintain the temple's sacred authority. Telling a newcomer to approach it with an open mind and avoid outside perspectives ultimately seeks to control expectations and prevent cognitive dissonance. This advice is designed to ensure the new participant does not encounter the historical facts, which would expose the ceremony's non-scriptural Masonic origins, but instead attributes any initial confusion to the ritual's deep spiritual mystery or their own insufficient faith or preparation. And the last thing Melinda suggests is, it's a starting point, not a finish line. That is such a crucial distinction to make, she says. If we treat this spiritual coming-of-age experience like the finish line event, it almost can't help but be somehow confusing or disappointing or frustrating. One analogy that can be helpful is comparing their first endowment experience to a school orientation, not graduation. When you started college, you had a couple of days of orientation, Melinda explains. You didn't expect yourself to know everything. In fact, that would be ridiculous. You were coming to start college. It's not your graduation day. it's your orientation day. It's a beginning. If you can let go of that finish line idea of receiving the endowment, you give yourself a lot more room for healthy growth. For me, the flaw in Melinda Brown's analogy, which frames the temple endowment as an orientation, not graduation, is that it's a psychological coping mechanism that fails because the promised curriculum doesn't exist. While this rhetoric is designed to mitigate a newcomer's disappointment by suggesting a starting point for healthy growth, the reality is that the temple ceremony is static and fully delivered in the initial session. Since the church does not offer new advanced ordinances or continuing public revelation beyond that initial rite, with the extremely rare and unofficial exception of the second anointing, which is reserved for only the spiritual elite, the promise of more to know is hollow. This shift compels members to seek growth through subjective feeling and endless repetition, masking the reality that the spiritual curriculum has in fact ended. There is no meat in Mormonism. Now let's go to this text message from a parent to their adult child. It says, "I saw your recent post, and most pics were great. I just wanted to share a quick thought. Would you consider being a little more mindful about sharing photos that highlight alcohol or tobacco use? You've got younger siblings and some church friends who look up to you and follow your posts. I know you're just being yourself, but those kinds of images might send mixed signals to people who are still figuring things out. We are proud of you, just hoping you'll think about the influence you have. Love you, bud." And then in parentheses, "and Nana, who is extremely sensitive to alcohol use due to being raised by an alcoholic father and having an alcoholic brother." Wow, there's a lot to unpack here. First off, we need to establish that this adult child is absolutely not responsible for how other people choose to feel or act because of seeing their social media posts. The mother's request subtly pressures the child to manage the church's cultural standards, which is an unfair burden. More troubling, the inclusion of Nana's traumatic history with alcoholism is a classic example of emotional blackmail. It instantly elevates a simple disagreement over the word of wisdom into a moral issue of emotional violence, implying that the child's photo is actively inflicting pain on a vulnerable relative. This manipulative tactic corners the child, forcing them into an impossible choice between their personal autonomy and causing significant family pain. Now we will head to the Salt Lake Tribune again, where it says, "For years, Black students at Brigham Young University have used the same words to describe how they felt walking into the administration building on campus that's named for a noted slaveholder: uncomfortable, unwelcome, unheard. They've tried launching petitions and writing letters to BYU, pleading for the school to drop Abraham O. Smoot's name or physical acknowledgement about his past. The private university's administration has not taken action on the matter, but now, after about a decade of pushing, it seems those pleas could be indirectly answered. The school announced earlier this month that because of its age, it plans to demolish the Abraham O. Smoot administration building that was originally constructed in 1961. That work is expected to be done at the end of December. Next, BYU will start work on a new building to replace it. That's expected to be done by fall of 2028. The Provo school declined to say if it would keep the Smoot name on the new building. BYU spokesperson Audrey Perry Martin said, "At this point, we don't have any additional information about the name of the building." Wow, the decision to demolish the building appears to be a politically safe maneuver to indirectly resolve the controversy while avoiding genuine ethical accountability. For over a decade, the university resisted simply adding a plaque or changing the name, which would have required a direct public acknowledgement and apology for honoring a slaveholder. Instead, BYU is using the structural necessity of replacing the aging building to potentially drop the name without ever formally condemning Smoot's past or acknowledging the decade of pain endured by Black students. This inaction prolongs the harm by signaling that avoiding controversy is prioritized over genuine reparative justice. Did they also avoid the name change because it would inevitably draw scrutiny back to the foundational namesake figure Brigham Young and the deeply problematic actions inherent in the university's very identity? It definitely looks like BYU is structurally unable to resolve the smaller issue without confronting the larger, more existential stain of its founder. The Salt Lake Tribune also recently highlighted the following: BYU billed North Carolina coming to the Delta Center as the unofficial start of the A.J. DeBanza era. BYU fans get their first glimpse of the team in Utah, the athletics website advertised before the Cougars' preseason game on Friday. But when the Tar Heels finally rolled into Salt Lake City, large chunks of the arena were empty due to the high ticket prices. To sit in the lower bowl, tickets for the exhibition game were going for more than $300. Just to get in the door, upper October Bowl tickets were going for $94. It's out of whack, Max Lloyd, a BYU booster sitting in the upper deck, said. Lloyd was a season ticket holder for years, but said he was priced out for the most anticipated season in BYU history. When BYU brought in the #1 recruit in the country, the athletic department acknowledged season ticket costs would increase, and it would be harder to get a ticket to regular season games. Marriott Center season tickets were completely sold out in less than 24 hours. Those tickets cost tens of thousands to get in, including the required donations for the most coveted seats. Some even paid up to $50,000. But some fans were displeased that even preseason games were going for hundreds of dollars, pricing out some average fans. I was never a cool, popular Mormon, and I definitely was never a rich one. I would not be able to afford that either. And last up today, let's go to this great quote that says, if you use Genesis chapters 1 through 2 to defend patriarchy, then you also have to be a vegan and a nudist. I'm sorry, I don't make the rules. And that's your update for today, folks. I absolutely hope you have the day that you deserve.